Masterclass 2. How Fluent Speakers Think in English, Brain Training Method. Welcome back. If you are here, it means you are serious, and that already puts you ahead of 90% of English learners in the world. Most people study English for years, sometimes decades, and they still cannot hold a natural conversation without pausing, without looking up at the ceiling, without that uncomfortable silence while they search for words inside their own head. They know grammar rules, and they have memorized hundreds of vocabulary words. They can pass tests. But the moment someone speaks to them in English, something breaks down. That something is not grammar. That something is not vocabulary. That something is the mental process that connects thinking to speaking. Today, we are going after that mental process directly. We are going to open up the brain and look at what is actually happening inside the mind of a fluent English speaker. What we are going to understand why translation kills your fluency, why it slows you down, why it makes you sound unnatural, and most importantly, we are going to build a completely new mental architecture inside your head. An architecture that allows you to think in English the same way you think in your native language, automatically, effortlessly, and without conscious effort. This is not a lesson about grammar rules. This is not a lesson about vocabulary lists. This is a deep masterclass on the cognitive science of language, the neuroscience of fluency, and the practical daily methods that will rewire your brain to think in English from the inside out. By the time this masterclass is over, you will have a complete brain training system that you can start using today. Not next week, not after you learn more words. Today. So settle in, take notes, stay with me through every section, because every part of this masterclass builds on the last. And this is not information you can skim. This is a system you need to absorb. Let us begin. Part 1. The Translation Trap. Why your brain is working against you. The first thing we need to talk about is translation. Because if you are still translating in your head when you speak English, everything else we do today will only help you partially. Translation is the single biggest enemy of English fluency, and most learners do not even realize they are doing it. And here is what happens inside your brain when you translate. You receive information in English. Maybe someone asks you a question. Your brain takes that English input and immediately converts it into your native language so your mind can understand it. Then your brain thinks of an answer in your native language. Then your brain translates that answer back into English. Then you speak. That entire process for a non-fluent speaker can take anywhere from 2 to 10 seconds, sometimes longer. And then during those seconds, the conversation has moved on. The moment is gone, and you feel left behind. But here is the deeper problem. It is not just the time, it is the quality. When you translate, you are not thinking in English. You are thinking in your language and dressing it up in English clothes. And the result almost always sounds slightly unnatural. The word order is off. The idioms do not quite fit. The rhythm of the sentence is wrong. Native speakers can feel it, even if they cannot always explain exactly what is off. They feel that the language was not born from English thought. It was imported from another language and translated. Now I want you to imagine a different scenario. Imagine a child growing up in an English-speaking home. That child is never taught grammar rules. That child is never shown a vocabulary list. That child is never asked to translate anything. And yet by age 5 or 6, that child is completely fluent in English. Why? And because that child's brain built a direct connection between the world, the concepts, the feelings, the experiences, and English words. There was no intermediate language. There was no translation layer. The thought and the English expression of that thought were one and the same thing. That is exactly what we are trying to rebuild in your brain. We are trying to eliminate the translation layer and build that same kind of direct connection. And the good news is that the adult brain can absolutely do this. It takes training, it takes the right methods, but it is possible, and thousands of adult learners have done it successfully. The question is, how? How do you actually build that direct connection? How do you get your brain to stop reaching for your native language and start reaching for English instead? That is what the rest of this masterclass is about. But before we get to the methods, and we need to understand one more thing about the translation trap. Why it is so hard to escape. Your native language is not just a tool you use. It is the foundation of your identity. It is the language you dream in. It is the language your emotions live in. When something shocks you, your first word is in your native language. When you are in pain, when you are in joy, when you are in love, all of that is expressed first in your native language. In your native language is wired into the deepest parts of your brain. So when you try to force your brain to use English, it resists. It goes back to what is familiar, what is safe, what is automatic. And that is why willpower alone is not enough. You cannot just tell yourself to think in English and expect it to happen. You need to actually rewire your brain at a deeper level. You need to create new neural pathways that make English feel as natural as your native language. And that requires specific training done consistently over time. Let me give you an analogy. Imagine you have been driving with your right hand on the gear stick your whole life. One day, you get a car where the gear stick is on the left. You know intellectually what to do. You understand the concept, but your right hand keeps reaching for the gear stick automatically. Your muscle memory overrides your conscious intention. And the only way to change this is to practice with the left hand gear stick every day until it becomes the new automatic pattern, until your brain stops sending the signal to your right hand and starts sending it to your left. That is exactly what we are doing with English thinking. We are retraining the automatic signal. We are building new automatic patterns. And the 6 brain training methods I am going to give you today are the specific exercises that will build those patterns over time. Part 2. Inside the fluent speaker's brain. What is actually happening? Before we get to the training methods, I want to take you inside the mind of a truly fluent English speaker. I want you to understand what is happening neurologically and cognitively when someone speaks English with no effort, no pause, no translation. Because once you understand the target, once you can see clearly what fluency actually looks like from the inside, the training methods will make much more sense. Fluent speakers do not think in words. That is the first thing you need to understand. They think in concepts. They think in images. They think in feelings. And those concepts, images, and feelings automatically attach to English words and phrases without any conscious selection process. When a fluent English speaker sees a dog, they do not think the concept of dog, then search their mental vocabulary list for the English word, and then say dog. The sight of the dog and the word dog are fused, and there is no gap between the perception and the word. This fusion happens through something called automaticity. Automaticity is when a mental process that once required conscious attention becomes completely automatic, requiring no conscious effort at all. Think about how you learned to read in your native language. At first, you had to consciously decode each letter, sound it out, put the sounds together, recognize the word. It was slow and effortful. Or now you look at a word and you immediately know what it means. You do not decode. You do not sound it out. The meaning arrives automatically. That is automaticity. Fluency is the automaticity of language, and the only way to build automaticity is through massive amounts of meaningful practice. There is no shortcut. But there are smart ways and dumb ways to practice. Most English learners practice in the dumb way. They study grammar rules, they memorize vocabulary lists, and they practice in artificial situations that have nothing to do with real communication. The smart way is to practice in a way that directly builds the neural connections you actually need for fluent, natural English thinking and speaking. The second thing that happens in a fluent speaker's brain is what linguists call chunking. Fluent speakers do not process language word by word. They process it in chunks, meaningful units that have been stored as single items in long-term memory. When a fluent English speaker says, "Good morning, how are you?" they are not producing three separate words, followed by three more separate words. They are producing one chunk and then another chunk. Both chunks have been stored as single units, like a single button that plays a whole piece of music when you press it. This is incredibly important for you to understand because it means that fluency is not about knowing more individual words. Fluency is about storing more chunks. The more chunks you have stored, the more ready-made phrases, expressions, sentence starters, and patterns you have saved in your long-term memory, the more fluent you will sound. Because you are not constructing language from scratch every time. You are retrieving it, already assembled. And here is the beautiful thing about chunks. They sound natural by definition because they were absorbed from real native speaker language. When you learn the phrase, "I couldn't agree more," and you did not construct that, you absorbed it. And when you use it, it sounds natural, not because you figured out the grammar, but because you stored a real piece of native speaker English and you are replaying it. The third thing happening in a fluent speaker's brain is prediction. When a fluent speaker listens to English, their brain is constantly predicting what is coming next. Before the sentence is finished, their brain has already formed a hypothesis about how it will end. This prediction ability is what allows fluent speakers to process language at full speaking speed, which is actually extremely fast without falling behind. If your brain cannot predict, you're always playing catch up. You hear a word, you process it. You hear the next word, you process it. But by then, the speaker has moved on three more words, and you are lost. Building prediction ability requires massive exposure to English in context, or your brain needs to see patterns thousands of times before it can predict reliably. And this is why reading and listening extensively in English is so crucial. Every time you encounter English in context, your brain is learning patterns. It is learning that after because usually comes a subject and a verb. It is learning that the word although usually signals a contrast. It is learning that when someone says, "I have to be honest," what follows is usually something that might be difficult to hear. And these are not grammar rules you memorize. These are patterns your brain absorbs unconsciously through exposure. So the three things happening in a fluent speaker's brain are automaticity of word concept connections, chunked storage of ready-made language, and predictive processing. And all three of these things can be trained, not through traditional grammar study, but through the specific brain training methods I am going to give you now. Part 3. The 6 brain training methods, your complete system method. 1. Concept first thinking. The first and most fundamental method is what I call concept first thinking. And here is exactly what it means and how to practice it. Right now, when you want to say something in English, your brain first forms the idea in your native language and then translates it. I want you to completely reverse this process. Instead of starting with a word or a sentence, and to start with a raw concept, a feeling, an image, a situation, and then reach directly for English. Here is a practice exercise. Choose any object in your immediate environment. Do not think of the word for it in your native language. Look at the object. Feel its texture. Notice its color. Notice what it is used for. And then let English words come to describe it. If you are looking at a window, do not think the word in your language and then translate. Look at the glass or notice the light coming through. Notice the frame and let the English word window arrive on its own. This sounds almost too simple, but do not underestimate it. What you are actually doing is cutting the neural connection between visual perception and your native language word, and building a new connection between visual perception and the English word. Every time you do this exercise, you are making that new connection stronger. And every time you reach for your native language word first, you are making the old connection stronger. The key to this exercise is deliberate attention. You have to consciously decide to bypass your native language. You have to pause that automatic reaching for your native language word and instead wait for the English word. In the beginning, there will be a gap. There will be a moment of silence where you are waiting for the English word to come. That is okay. That gap is the space where the new neural connection is being built. Over time, and that gap will shrink. The English word will come faster and faster until it comes at the same speed as your native language word would have. Expand this practice to everything in your life. When you eat breakfast, think in English about what you are tasting. When you walk outside, think in English about what you see. When you feel an emotion, happiness, frustration, boredom, excitement, immediately reach for the English words to describe that feeling. Not the translation. The concept are directly connected to the English word. One specific technique within this method is what I call sensory labeling. For 1 hour each day, go through your environment and mentally label everything you see, hear, feel, smell, and taste in English only. No native language at all during that hour. You do not say the word out loud. You just think it in English. This hour of sensory labeling done every day for 30 days will produce a noticeable shift in how quickly English words come to you. Another technique within concept first thinking is what I call emotion anchoring. Take the 6 most common emotions you experience in daily life. Something like happy, tired, stressed, excited, bored, and relaxed. For each emotion, write 3 to 5 English phrases that express that emotion, not translations, actual phrases that native speakers use. For happy, you might write things like, I am on top of the world. This is incredible. I couldn't be happier. I am so glad. For stressed, And you might write, I am swamped, I am overwhelmed, I have too much on my plate, I cannot keep up with everything. Now, every time you feel one of those emotions, immediately recall the English phrases for that emotion. You are building a direct connection between emotional experience and English expression. And because emotions are so deeply personal and visceral, this connection will be strong. When you are genuinely stressed and you reach for those English stress phrases, think your brain is connecting the raw feeling of stress to English words. That connection is more powerful than any grammar drill. Method 2. Inner voice training. Every human being has an inner voice, that constant stream of thought running through your mind at all times. Your inner voice is the most intimate form of language use there is, and for most English learners, that inner voice is entirely in their native language. We need to change that. Inner voice training is the practice of deliberately shifting your internal monologue into English. This is not as strange or as difficult as it sounds, but it does require consistent, deliberate practice. You are not going to wake up tomorrow and suddenly think in English all day. What you are going to do is take it in stages. Stage 1 is the commentary stage. For 15 minutes each day, set a timer if you need to. Provide a running commentary in English on whatever you are doing. Now, if you are making coffee, you think things like, I am putting the kettle on. I need to measure the grounds. I think I will make it stronger today. The water is almost boiling. I love the smell of fresh coffee. None of this needs to be complex. None of this needs to be grammatically perfect. The goal is simply to get your inner voice speaking English, even for short periods. After a week of the commentary stage, move to stage 2, which is the reflection stage. During your reflection stage, and you use English to process what happened during your day. Before you go to sleep, you spend 10 minutes thinking in English about what happened, not saying it out loud, just thinking it. What did I do today? I went to work. I had a really difficult meeting with my manager. I felt frustrated because I didn't feel heard. But later, I had lunch with a good friend, and that helped a lot. I need to remember to call my sister tomorrow. And the reflection stage is powerful because you are using English to process real, meaningful experiences, your real life, your real emotions, your real relationships. This gives the English language emotional weight in your brain. It stops being just an academic subject and starts becoming a real vehicle for your real inner life. And that shift is huge. Stage 3 of inner voice training is the planning stage. Use English to plan your day, your week, your goals. What do I need to do today? First, I have to finish that report. Then I should call the bank. I have been putting that off for too long. This afternoon, I want to go to the gym if I can find the energy. Planning in English forces you to use future tenses, conditional sentences, and expressions of intention, all of which are extremely common in real English communication. Now, there will be moments during inner voice training when you genuinely cannot think of the English word you need. When that happens, here is what you do. And you do not switch to your native language. Instead, you describe the concept using the English words you do have. If you cannot remember the English word for a specific type of road, you think something like that kind of small road between buildings. You are working around the gap in English instead of retreating to your native language. This workaround strategy is itself a form of fluency training, because this is exactly what native speakers do when they cannot remember a specific word. They describe around it. And practicing this keeps you in English even when your vocabulary is limited. Another powerful inner voice technique is what I call the rewind and replay method. When something happens during your day, a conversation, an event, a moment, replay it in your mind in English. If you had a conversation with someone in your native language, replay that conversation in English. What would I have said if we were speaking English? How would I have expressed that point? What would they have said? This rewind and replay trains your brain to find English equivalents for real conversational content, which is much more useful than any translation exercise. Method 3. Chunk absorption. We already talked about how fluent speakers think in chunks rather than individual words. Now I am going to give you the specific method for absorbing those chunks into your long-term memory in a way that makes them automatically available when you need them. A chunk absorption is different from vocabulary study. When you study vocabulary, you learn individual words, their meanings, and maybe their grammar. When you absorb chunks, you are storing complete, ready-made units of natural English that you can deploy immediately in real speech. And the method I am going to give you is far more effective than any flashcard app or vocabulary list. The method is called deep processing, and here is how it works. You find a piece of authentic English, a short video, a podcast clip, a scene from a TV show, a short article. Something real, not textbook English. Something that native speakers actually made for other native speakers. You listen to or read this content multiple times. But here is the crucial part. Each time you go through it, you focus on different things. The first time, you just experience it for meaning. What is happening? What is the main idea? And do not worry about individual words or phrases. Just get the overall meaning. The second time, you focus on language. You start noticing specific phrases and expressions, not isolated words. Phrases. How do they express this idea? What words go together here? What is the natural phrasing for this kind of situation? The third time, you choose 3 to 5 chunks that you want to absorb. These are phrases that you feel are useful, natural, and applicable to your own life. And you might choose things like it turns out that I was not expecting that at all, to be perfectly honest. On the bright side, that makes a lot of sense. Now comes the deep processing. For each chunk you choose, you do 4 things. First, you say it out loud several times, getting the rhythm and sound of it into your muscle memory. Second, you put it in a sentence about your own life, not a made-up sentence, a real sentence about something in your actual experience. Third, you imagine a specific real situation where you would use this chunk. See the situation in your mind. Hear yourself saying the chunk in that situation. Fourth, you write the chunk down with your own example sentence. This 4-step deep processing does something very specific in your brain. It takes the chunk out of the text you found it in and puts it into the context of your own life. It gives the chunk personal meaning, personal emotional connection, and personal situational relevance. And because of all that personal connection, your brain stores it much more deeply and makes it much more available for retrieval in real conversations. How many chunks should you absorb per day? Research in language acquisition suggests that 5 to 7 is the optimal range. More than that, and your brain starts to overload and storage quality decreases. Less than that, and your progress is too slow. 5 to 7 deeply processed chunks per day adds up to 150 to 200 chunks per month. After 6 months of this practice, you will have absorbed somewhere between 900 and 1200 ready made English phrases stored in your long term memory and available for automatic retrieval. That is a completely different brain than the one you have today. There is a second technique within chunk absorption that I call shadowing with intention. Shadowing is a well known technique where you listen to English audio and repeat it at the same time, overlapping with the speaker's voice. But most people do shadowing incorrectly. They focus entirely on the sounds, on the pronunciation, and the rhythm. And while that is valuable, it is not chunk absorption. Shadowing with intention means you shadow for meaning and language simultaneously. As you repeat the speaker's words, you are consciously noting the chunks. You are feeling their rhythm, and you are imagining the situations where you would use them. You are not just parroting sounds. You are absorbing language with your full attention on what the language means, how it is constructed, and why it is phrased the way it is. Do 20 minutes of shadowing with intention every single day. Choose content that is slightly above your current level. What language acquisition researchers call I plus one, where I is your current level and the content is one step above that. This slight challenge keeps your brain engaged and learning. If the content is too easy, your brain coasts and stores nothing new. If it is too hard, your brain gets overwhelmed and also stores nothing. The sweet spot is challenging but understandable. Method 4. Situational simulation. The fourth method is one that I personally find incredibly powerful, and it is one that very few English learners ever use. I call it situational simulation. And the idea behind it is devastatingly simple. And you cannot just wait for real English situations to arrive and practice in them. You need to simulate those situations in your mind and practice them before they happen. Think about what athletes do. A basketball player does not just play games and hope to improve. They practice specific moves in training. They shoot free throws 1,000 times. They practice particular defensive scenarios. They rehearse repeatedly the exact situations they know they will face in the real game. And when the game arrives, their movements are automatic because they have already practiced them hundreds of times. Language works the same way. If you know you have a job interview coming up, you do not just wait for the interview and hope you can find the words. You simulate the interview in your mind. You imagine the questions they will ask. You practice your answers in English. You go through the entire scenario multiple times until the language feels automatic and natural. And when the real interview comes, you're not searching for words. You are retrieving phrases you have already prepared and practiced. But situational simulation is not just for specific upcoming events. You can practice everyday situations that you regularly encounter. Think about the situations in your life where you wish you could speak English more fluently. A meeting at work, a conversation with a foreign colleague, an interview, a presentation, ordering food in an English-speaking restaurant, chatting with a native English-speaking neighbor, talking on the phone in English. Pick one of those situations. Sit in a quiet place where you will not be disturbed. Close your eyes. Imagine the situation in complete detail. Where are you? Who else is there? What do you see around you? Make it as real as possible in your imagination. Now begin the conversation. In your mind, say the opening words in English. Imagine the other person responding. I continue the conversation. What would they say? What would you say? What questions would they ask? What would you need to explain? If you get stuck, if you reach a point where you do not know how to say something in English, do not switch to your native language. Instead, pause the simulation. Make a mental note of what you wanted to say. After the simulation, look up English phrases for that specific gap. Then run the simulation again, this time with the new phrase included. You do 5 minutes of situational simulation every morning, not thinking about English in general, imagining a specific, concrete situation and practicing it in English in your mind. This primes your brain for English thinking throughout the day. It is like a warm-up exercise for your English mental muscles. A variation on situational simulation is what I call the parallel conversation method. Throughout your day, you will have conversations in your native language. After each significant conversation, take 2 minutes to replay it in English. What would I have said if this were in English? What would the other person have said? Do not try to translate word for word. Instead, think about the purpose of each part of the conversation and find English expressions that achieve the same purpose. Over time, this parallel conversation practice will dramatically increase the range of English you have available for real conversational situations. And because you are taking the actual situations of your real life, your real relationships, your real workplace, your real social situations, and training English on them, not on textbook scenarios that have nothing to do with your life, but on your actual life. Method 5. Emotional association building. I mentioned emotion earlier when we talked about emotion anchoring in Method 1. Now I want to go much deeper into the role of emotion in language acquisition, because this is one of the most underestimated and underutilized tools available to adult language learners. Here is the neuroscience. The brain has a structure called the amygdala, which processes emotional information when something has strong emotional significance, positive or negative. The amygdala sends a signal that essentially says to the hippocampus, which is the memory center, this is important, store this deeply. And the hippocampus responds by encoding that experience much more thoroughly than experiences that had no emotional significance. This is why you remember your first kiss, but you cannot remember what you had for lunch 2 Wednesdays ago. Both experiences happened, but one had emotional significance and the other did not. The one with emotional significance was encoded deeply, the other was discarded. Now think about how most people learn English vocabulary. They look at a list of words, or they see the English word next to the translation in their language. They read it a few times. Maybe they make a flashcard. There is no emotion involved. There is no personal connection. There is no situational context. The brain looks at this experience and says low priority, shallow encoding. And that is why vocabulary lists are so inefficient. The most of what you study from a vocabulary list is forgotten within 48 hours because there was nothing emotional or personally meaningful about the experience. Emotional association building is the practice of deliberately connecting English words and phrases to real emotional experiences in your life. And here is a powerful method for doing this that I have seen completely transform learners' vocabularies. Take an important memory from your life, a meaningful experience, and something that had real emotional weight, a moment of triumph, a time of real difficulty, a beautiful experience, a painful experience, a funny experience, a deeply touching one. Now write about that experience entirely in English, not a translation of how you would tell it in your native language. Actively think through the memory in English. Feel the emotions again as you write. Use the English words for those emotions. Use the English words for the details of the scene. And when you do not know a word, look it up and add it to your writing. This exercise is extraordinarily powerful for two reasons. First, it connects English to real emotional experiences, which means your brain stores the language deeply. Second, it forces you to find English expressions for the most personal and intimate parts of your experience, the parts that matter most to you, which means the English you learn through this exercise will never feel like foreign language. It will feel like your language because it is the language of your personal story. Do this for 10 minutes every day. Write about something from your life in English. It does not have to be dramatic or profound. It can be something funny that happened today, something surprising, something you are looking forward to, something that annoyed you, anything that carries real feeling. The feeling is what makes the language stick. Another technique within emotional association building is what I call the English media immersion method. This is different from just watching English TV. Most people watch English TV passively. They follow the story. They understand the main plot, but they are not deeply engaged with the language itself. For emotional association building, you need to find English content that actually moves you emotionally. Find an English TV show, film, documentary, or YouTube channel that you are genuinely passionate about. Not something you think you should watch for learning, something you actually want to watch because it genuinely interests or excites or moves you. When you find content you care about deeply, your emotional engagement carries the language into long-term memory far more effectively than anything you watch with detachment. And the reason this works is that your brain is not separating the emotional experience of the content from the language of the content. When a scene in a film moves you, the English words in that scene are encoded with the emotional weight of that moment. Later, when you need to express something similar in real life, those words come back to you because they were stored with emotion. And this is why so many successful English learners credit English films and TV shows as a major factor in their fluency, not because they were learning vocabulary consciously, but because they were having real emotional experiences in English. And those emotional experiences built the deepest possible connections between English language and human experience. Method 6. Output without safety nets. The sixth and final method is the one that brings everything together, and it is called output without safety nets. And it is exactly what it sounds like. It is the practice of using English in real situations with real consequences, without the safety net of preparation, translation, or long pauses to think. All of the previous 5 methods are internal. They are about rewiring your brain from the inside. They are about building the mental architecture of fluency, but none of them involves actual real-world English output. And at some point, you have to take what you have built internally and deploy it externally. You have to actually speak English to real people in real situations. The problem is that most learners avoid this. They wait until they feel ready, but ready never comes because the only way to feel ready is to do it before you feel ready. The discomfort of speaking before you feel completely prepared is actually the training. The discomfort is what forces your brain to operate without translation. When you are in a real conversation with a real person, and there is no time to translate. Your brain is forced to retrieve language directly. And every time it successfully does that, every time you find the English words without translating, that pathway gets stronger. Here is how to practice output without safety nets systematically. First, find opportunities for real English interaction. These do not have to be dramatic or high pressure. They can be small. Commenting on an English-speaking person's video online in English, joining an English conversation club, using language exchange apps to speak with native English speakers, ordering something in English at a restaurant, calling customer service in English when you have an option to, asking a question in English at an event or conference. Second, when you're in those situations, adopt a specific mental posture. Commit to English only, no pausing and translating in your head. If you do not know a word, describe around it. If you make a grammatical error, keep going. Do not stop. Do not apologize. Do not switch to your native language. Keep moving forward in English. The goal is not perfect English. The goal is continuous English. The goal is keeping the mental process running in English without interruption. Third, after each real English interaction, do a quick mental review. What went well? Where did I get stuck? What words or phrases did I wish I had? And then target those gaps in your other training methods. If you got stuck trying to explain a specific concept, practice situational simulation for that concept. If there was a phrase you couldn't remember, add it to your chunk absorption practice. This creates a beautiful feedback loop. Real interactions reveal your gaps. Your gaps guide your internal training. Your internal training fills your gaps. Your improved internal resources make your next real interaction better. And so on, and upward and upward. There is a more advanced form of output without safety nets that I call the discomfort protocol. Once per week, deliberately put yourself in an English situation that is slightly beyond your current comfort level. Not completely overwhelming, but stretched. If you normally have 5-minute English conversations, try to have a 20-minute one. If you normally talk about safe, familiar topics, try discussing something more complex and nuanced. If you normally talk with one person, try talking in a small group. The discomfort protocol works because comfort zones are the enemy of neural growth. Your brain builds new capabilities when it is slightly stressed, slightly challenged, slightly beyond its current easy mode. This is true for physical exercise, and it is equally true for mental and linguistic exercise. If you only ever do what is easy, you only ever get better at what is already easy. Push yourself regularly, and your brain responds by building new capacities. Part 4. The daily brain training schedule. How to put it all together. You now have 6 methods, but knowing 6 methods is not enough. You need a daily schedule that integrates all of them in a realistic, sustainable way. Because the fundamental rule of brain training is consistency above intensity. 30 minutes every day for 6 months will produce dramatically better results than 3 hours on the weekend. Your brain builds neural pathways through repetition over time, not through occasional marathon sessions. Here is a complete daily brain training schedule built around the 6 methods. This schedule assumes you have approximately 60 to 90 minutes per day to devote to English thinking training. If you have less time, you can reduce each segment. If you have more time, you can expand the output without safety nets component. But do not skip any of the 6 methods. And each one trains a different aspect of your English thinking, and you need all six working together. The morning begins with 5 minutes of situational simulation. Right after you wake up, before you check your phone, before you speak to anyone, spend 5 minutes lying in bed or sitting quietly, running through an English conversation scenario in your mind. Keep your eyes closed. Make it vivid. Use real English. This sets your brain's English channel to active mode first thing in the morning. And then, during your morning routine, showering, getting dressed, making breakfast, drinking coffee, do 15 minutes of concept first thinking and inner voice training. Mentally label everything you interact with in English. Think your way through your morning routine in English. Provide a running commentary in your head. You do not need to set a timer for this. Just commit to thinking in English for the duration of your morning routine. During your commute or during any travel time you have, own to 20 minutes of chunk absorption through shadowing with intention. Listen to a podcast, an audiobook in English, or a short video clip. Repeat what the speaker says slightly after or simultaneously with them. Focus on the chunks. Feel the rhythm. Let the natural English patterns wash over you and into you. During your lunch break or at some point midday, do 10 minutes of emotional association building through writing, and take whatever is emotionally present for you right now. Something you are excited about, something that frustrated you this morning, something you are looking forward to, something you are processing, and write about it in English. Use your phone notes, app, a journal, anything that is convenient. Just make it real and make it emotional. In the evening, do 20 minutes of chunk absorption with deep processing. This is the more structured version. Find a piece of authentic English content and go through the deep processing steps. Identify your 5 to 7 chunks for the day. Say them, use them in personal sentences, visualize situations, write them down. And then, a minimum of 3 times per week, do output without safety nets. Find an English interaction opportunity. Use English with real people in real situations. Take notes afterward on where you were strong and where you struggled. That is the complete daily schedule. 5 minutes of situational simulation, 15 minutes of concept first thinking and inner voice training, 20 minutes of shadowing with intention, 10 minutes of emotional writing, 20 minutes of deep processing chunk absorption, and 3 times per week, real English output, 70 minutes per day on weekdays, and approximately 30 minutes per day on the days you do not do the output session. Is this a lot? Yes. Is it worth it? Absolutely. Because every single minute of this schedule is directly training the neural pathways that produce English fluency, not studying grammar rules that you then have to remember to apply, not memorizing vocabulary that you then have to translate, directly training the thinking process of fluency. Now, let me tell you what to expect week by week, so you have realistic expectations and you do not give up when progress feels slow. In the first week, and you will feel awkward and self-conscious about thinking in English. Your inner voice will keep wanting to switch back to your native language. The situational simulations will feel stilted. The chunks you are trying to absorb will not feel natural yet. This is completely normal. This is what it feels like to build a new neural pathway. The path does not exist yet, and you are cutting through new territory. It is hard. In the second and third week, you will start to notice the first small shifts, and there will be moments when an English phrase comes to you spontaneously, without you consciously searching for it. These moments will feel surprising and exciting. Treasure them. They are proof that new neural connections are forming. By the end of the first month, your inner voice will be spending noticeably more time in English, even without deliberate effort. You will start to notice that certain situations automatically trigger English thinking, and especially situations that you have practiced in your simulations or have had real English interactions in. By the end of month two, the translation habit will have significantly weakened for common, everyday situations. You will still translate in more complex or unfamiliar situations, but for routine daily life, you will be thinking much more directly in English. By the end of month three, you will have stored hundreds of chunks in your long-term memory. You will start to notice that your English sounds more natural to native speakers because you are using real chunks rather than word-by-word constructions. Your fluency in real conversations will have measurably improved. By the end of month six, if you have been consistent, you will be thinking in English a significant portion of the time without deliberate effort. The new neural pathways will have become strong enough that English thinking has become habitual in many situations. And you will still need to continue practicing, continue absorbing new chunks, continue seeking out real English interactions. But the fundamental shift will have happened. Your brain will have been genuinely retrained. Part 5. The Psychology of Brain Training. What goes on in your head and how to manage it. I would be doing you a disservice if I only talked about methods and schedules without talking about the psychological dimension of this kind of training. And because the biggest obstacle to thinking in English is not actually a language problem, it is a psychological problem. It is fear, self-consciousness, perfectionism, and the identity discomfort that comes from expressing yourself in a language that doesn't yet feel like you. Let us talk about each of these psychological obstacles honestly and directly. Fear is the most obvious one. Fear of making mistakes, fear of sounding stupid, fear of not being understood, fear of being judged. And if you have ever opened your mouth to speak English and felt a wave of anxiety, you know exactly what I am talking about. And that anxiety is not just an emotional problem, it is a cognitive problem. Because anxiety actually impairs language performance. When you are anxious, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for complex cognitive tasks like language production, functions less effectively. You literally cannot find words as easily when you're anxious. So managing anxiety is not just about making yourself feel better. It is about literally improving your language performance. And the best way to manage language anxiety is through massive amounts of low-stakes practice. When you have practiced something hundreds of times in low-stakes situations, the stakes of the real situation feel much lower. Your brain recognizes the situation as familiar and reacts with confidence rather than alarm. And this is why the situational simulation and inner voice training methods are so important for psychology as well as for language. When you have simulated a job interview 20 times in your mind, the real job interview doesn't feel like a first encounter. Your brain says, "Oh, I have done this. I know what to say here," and your anxiety drops. The second psychological obstacle is self-consciousness. This is slightly different from fear. And self-consciousness is that feeling of being watched and judged that comes from expressing yourself imperfectly in a language. In your native language, you're able to express the full sophistication of your personality, your humor, your intelligence, your nuance. In English, you feel like a simplified version of yourself. You cannot make the joke that would have been perfect in your language. You cannot explain the concept with the precision you would have in your language. And this simplified version of yourself feels uncomfortable, even embarrassing. This is one of the most underappreciated challenges of adult language learning. And I want you to know that it is real, it is valid, and it is temporary. Every fluent bilingual speaker has gone through this period where they feel reduced in their second language, and every one of them who pushed through it eventually found their full personality in the new language. Your humor finds new forms. Your intelligence finds new expressions. Your personality does not disappear. It gets translated. The way through self-consciousness is to focus on connection rather than performance. Instead of thinking about whether you're expressing yourself perfectly, think about whether you are connecting with the person you are speaking with. Communication is fundamentally about connection, not about performance. Native speakers do not listen to you and grade your grammar. It's they listen to you and try to understand what you mean and who you are. Focus on that connection, and the self-consciousness will gradually fade. The third psychological obstacle is perfectionism. Perfectionism is the belief that you need to speak perfectly before you are allowed to speak at all, that you need to know all the grammar, that you need to have exactly the right word, that you cannot start a sentence until you know how it will end. Now, perfectionism is probably the single most paralyzing force in language learning. Here is the truth about perfectionism in language. Fluency and perfection are not the same thing. Native speakers make grammatical errors all the time. They use the wrong word. They start sentences and change direction halfway through. They say, um, and, and actually, and, perfect, formal, textbook English is not how people actually speak. Real speech is messy, approximate, and effective despite its imperfections. When you adopt the goal of fluency, which means communicating effectively and naturally, instead of the goal of perfection, which means never making errors, your brain is freed up to actually communicate. You stop monitoring every word for correctness and you start focusing on meaning. And paradoxically, when you stop monitoring for errors, you actually make fewer errors. And because your cognitive resources are freed up for communication rather than self-correction. So let go of perfectionism. Deliberately, consciously, give yourself permission to make errors. Give yourself permission to not know a word. Give yourself permission to speak imperfect English, because imperfect English that communicates is infinitely more valuable than perfect English that stays silent. The fourth psychological obstacle is identity resistance. This is the deepest and most subtle one. Every language embodies a culture, a worldview, a way of being in the world. When you speak English fluently, you are not just using a different vocabulary. You are inhabiting a different way of thinking and expressing yourself. And for many people, there is an unconscious resistance to this. It can feel like you are abandoning your culture, your identity, your original self. This resistance sometimes shows up as an inexplicable mental block when trying to think in English. Everything in your brain is technically capable of doing it. You know the words, you understand the grammar, but something stops you. That something is identity resistance. The way through identity resistance is to expand your identity rather than replace it. You are not becoming someone else when you speak English. You are becoming more. You are becoming a person who can inhabit multiple worlds, multiple perspectives, multiple cultural frameworks. Our bilingualism, and multilingualism are not identity dilution. They are identity enrichment. Every language you speak fluently gives you access to new ways of seeing the world, new ways of connecting with human beings, new dimensions of experience. Think of it this way. A musician who plays both piano and guitar has not betrayed the piano by also learning the guitar. They have expanded. They have more tools. They can make more music. You, as someone learning to think in English, or are expanding your expressive capacity. You are adding a new instrument to your repertoire. Your native language is not diminished. Your English thinking simply adds to who you are. Part 6. Advanced Techniques for Accelerating Fluency. Going deeper. For those of you who are ready to go beyond the 6 core methods and push your brain training to a higher level, this section is for you. And these are advanced techniques that build on everything we have already covered and accelerate the development of English thinking even further. The first advanced technique is what I call dream journaling in English. Research in psycholinguistics has found that when language learners start dreaming in their target language, it is a reliable indicator that the language has been internalized at a deep cognitive level, and it means the language has moved out of the conscious processing areas and into the automatic, unconscious processing systems. It means the language has truly become part of how the brain naturally operates. You cannot force yourself to dream in English, but you can encourage it by making English the last thing your brain processes before sleep. Spend 10 to 15 minutes before bed reading in English, writing in English, or doing your reflection inner voice practice in English. Then, when you wake up in the morning, before you do anything else, quickly write down whatever fragments of dreams you remember in English. Even if you can only remember images or feelings rather than specific events, try to describe those images and feelings in English. Over time, more and more of your dream content will naturally shift toward English. And as it does, you will notice that your daytime English thinking also becomes more natural and effortless. The two reinforce each other. Or when your unconscious mind is processing in English, your conscious mind finds English thinking easier. The second advanced technique is what I call accent absorption. Most people think of accent work as being about pronunciation, about how your mouth moves, where your tongue is, how your lips form sounds. And while those physical aspects are important, accent absorption goes deeper. It is about internalizing the music of English, the rhythm, the stress patterns, the intonation, the melody, and every language has a different music. Your native language has a particular rhythm, a particular pattern of stress, a particular melody. English has its own completely different music. And one of the subtle but powerful signals of natural thinking in English is that the music of your speech matches the music of native English speakers. When your rhythm, stress, and intonation are English, your brain is operating in English mode, even at the most fundamental acoustic level. To absorb English accent and music, choose one native English speaker whose voice and speech patterns you genuinely admire. Someone you find pleasant to listen to, a podcaster, a YouTuber, an actor, a public speaker. Listen to them for 20 minutes every day, specifically focused on the music of their speech, not on the content. Where do they stress words? Where do they pause? Where does their voice rise? Where does it fall? How fast do they speak? Where do they slow down? Then shadow them. and mirror their rhythm, their stress, their pauses, their intonation. You are not trying to become them. You are trying to absorb the music of natural English into your own speech. Over weeks and months of this practice, the music of English will become natural to you. And when the music is natural, the thinking becomes natural. The internal and the external are more connected than most people realize. The third advanced technique is what I call conceptual mapping. And this is a method for building the direct concept to English connections that we talked about in Method 1, but taken to a much more systematic level. Take a large piece of paper or open a mind mapping app. In the center, write a big concept. Let us say emotions. Then branch out from that center with every emotion you can think of. For each emotion, write the English word for it. Then, branching from each emotion word, or write three things: the situations that typically cause this emotion in your life, the English phrases and expressions you would use to describe this emotion, and the physical sensations that accompany this emotion. So for the emotion frustration you might have, situations like being stuck in traffic, not being understood, technology not working, making the same mistake again. Phrases like, I am at my wit's end. I cannot deal with this right now. This is so frustrating. I am losing my patience. Oh, I give up for today. And physical sensations like tension in my shoulders, clenching my jaw, sighing heavily, feeling hot in my face. What you are building with this conceptual map is a rich, multi-sensory, personal, emotionally connected web of English that covers one of the most important areas of human experience. Every time you return to this map, add more to it. Review what is already there. The connections become stronger and more automatic. After making maps for 20 or 30 major concept areas, emotions, relationships, work, health, opinions, time, space, qualities, actions, you will have a conceptual architecture in English that covers the vast majority of everyday communication needs. The fourth advanced technique is what I call the English immersion bubble. This is an ambitious technique that requires real commitment, but the results can be dramatic. The idea is to create periods, ideally whole days, but at minimum whole half days, where English is the only language you allow yourself to use, think in, consume, and produce. During an immersion bubble, everything is in English. Your phone is set to English. The content you consume is in English. When you think in English. When you write in English. When you speak in English, even if that means you speak to yourself. You do not read anything in your native language, and you do not watch anything in your native language. You do not look at social media in your native language. You are in English, completely and exclusively, for the duration of the bubble. The reason immersion bubbles are so powerful is that they eliminate the option of retreat. When your native language is constantly available, your brain uses it as a crutch. Even when you are trying to think in English, your native language is lurking in the background, ready to step in when English gets difficult. The immersion bubble removes that option. Your brain is forced to operate in English, and it finds a way, because it has no other choice. Start with a 2-hour bubble, then try a half day, then try a full day. Every time you do an immersion bubble, your English brain gets stronger because it had to operate without support for an extended period. And each time, you will notice that the English thinking comes more easily, more naturally, and more automatically than it did before. Part 7. Measuring your progress. How to know it is working. One of the most important and most neglected aspects of any training program is measurement. How do you know if what you are doing is working? How do you know if you are making progress? Without clear indicators of progress, it is easy to lose motivation, to doubt whether the methods are effective, or to keep practicing things that are not working and avoid the things that would actually help you. Here are the specific indicators that will tell you your brain is being retrained to think in English. These are not test scores. These are real-world, experiential indicators. The first indicator is spontaneous English thought. This is when English words or phrases pop into your mind without you consciously trying to think in English. And you might be in a situation where something funny happens and you immediately think something like, "Oh my goodness, that is hilarious." In English, automatically, without choosing to think in English. The first time this happens, notice it, celebrate it. It means a new neural pathway has become automatic. The second indicator is comprehension without translation. This is when you read or hear English and you understand it directly without any internal translation happening. You just understand, or the way you understand your native language. In the beginning stages, even when you understand English, there is a subtle internal translation or conversion happening. As your brain develops direct English thinking, that conversion step disappears. Understanding becomes immediate. The third indicator is thinking before speaking. In your native language, you do not usually plan your sentences before you say them. You start speaking and the words come. Where when you start experiencing this in English, when you can start a sentence without knowing exactly how it will end, and the ending arrives naturally as you speak, that is a profound indicator of deep fluency development. The fourth indicator is emotional resonance. When English words start to feel emotionally right rather than just intellectually correct, something deep has shifted. When the word devastated does not just mean very sad in your brain, but actually carries the weight of devastation. When you feel the word, not just understand it, that word has become part of your real inner vocabulary. The fifth indicator is humor. This is perhaps the most reliable indicator of all. You can understand a joke in a foreign language and even appreciate it intellectually. But if you actually laugh, if the laughter comes spontaneously before you have had time to think about why it is funny, that is genuine native level processing. But humor works at the speed of intuition. It does not give you time to translate. When English humor genuinely makes you laugh, your brain is processing English the same way it processes your native language. The sixth indicator is dreaming. As I mentioned earlier, dreaming in English is a sign that the language has been fully internalized. If you have an entire dream in English, or even parts of a dream in English, that is your subconscious mind demonstrating that it has fully adopted English as one of its operating languages. Track these indicators in a simple journal. Once a week, write down any of these indicators you experienced during the week. Even if it is just one small moment of spontaneous English thought, write it down. Date it. Over months, this journal will become a record of your genuine neurological transformation. And looking back at it during moments of doubt will remind you that real, measurable progress is happening. Part 8. Common mistakes that block English thinking and how to avoid them. We have spent most of this masterclass on what to do. Now let us spend some time on what and to do. Because there are several common behaviors that actively prevent English thinking from developing, and many learners fall into these traps without realizing it. The first and most damaging mistake is bilingual thinking, keeping both languages active simultaneously. This happens when you are technically in an English situation, but you are constantly comparing English to your native language. You are thinking things like, how would I say this in my language? Does this translation sound right? Is this what we would say in my language? When you are comparing languages, you are working in the translation mode, not the direct English thinking mode. And your brain cannot simultaneously develop direct English thinking and maintain a running comparison with your native language. The solution is not to suppress your native language. You cannot and should not try to do that. The solution is to practice choosing one or the other, not both. During your English training time, English only. Let your native language rest. It will still be there when you come back to it. During your native language time, stop thinking about English. Let that rest. Or when you compartmentalize the languages rather than mixing them, each language can develop more fully. The second mistake is studying about English instead of using English. There is a seductive trap in language learning where you feel productive when you are studying, reading about grammar, watching explanation videos, doing exercises in a workbook. But this studying gives you knowledge about English, not experience in English. And fluency is built through experience, not knowledge. But there is a place for grammar study. If you are confused about a specific structure and understanding the rule would clarify the confusion, look it up. But do not spend most of your language learning time studying grammar rules. Spend most of your time using English, thinking in English, writing in English, speaking in English, listening to English. The doing is what builds fluency. The studying is only useful insofar as it helps you do better. The third mistake is avoiding difficulty. When a situation in English feels too hard, the natural impulse is to switch to your native language or to avoid the situation altogether. I spoke earlier about the discomfort protocol and why deliberate exposure to difficult situations is essential. The same principle applies here as a mistake to avoid. If you are consistently choosing only easy, comfortable English situations, you are not growing. Your brain only builds new capacity when it is stretched beyond its current comfort zone. On the fourth mistake is inconsistency. This is the most common and most fatal mistake. You practice for a week, then life gets busy, then you skip a few days, then somehow 2 weeks have passed, and you have not done anything. And each gap in practice allows the new neural pathways you have been building to weaken. This is not just motivational advice, it is neuroscience. Neural pathways require regular activation to maintain their strength. Long gaps in practice literally cause regression. And the solution is to make your English brain training as automatic and non-negotiable as brushing your teeth. It does not matter if you are tired. It does not matter if you are busy. Even on the hardest days, spend 10 minutes thinking in English. Even if all you do is your morning 5-minute situational simulation and 5 minutes of inner voice commentary while making breakfast. 10 minutes of consistent daily practice is infinitely more valuable than 3 hours once a week. And the fifth mistake is confusing comprehension with production. You might be able to understand English very well, to read fluently, to follow films without subtitles, to understand fast native speech, and still struggle to speak fluently. This is because comprehension and production are different skills. supported by different neural systems. You can have very developed comprehension systems without having equally developed production systems. And the methods in this masterclass focus specifically on production, on getting the English out, because that is where most learners have their biggest gap. If you have strong comprehension but weak production, the output without safety nets method is the one to prioritize. More real English output, more frequently in more challenging situations, with less preparation. That is what will close the gap between understanding English well and producing it fluently. Now, Part 9. The identity of a fluent English thinker, becoming the person you want to be. We are nearing the end of this masterclass, and I want to finish with something that goes beyond techniques and schedules, something that I believe is actually the foundation of lasting fluency, and that is identity. There is a concept in psychology called identity-based habit formation, and the idea is this. The most powerful way to change a behavior is not to set a goal and try to achieve it. The most powerful way to change a behavior is to adopt a new identity and let the behavior follow naturally from that identity. Let me give you an example. If your goal is to exercise more, you might set a goal of going to the gym 3 times per week, and you might manage it for a few weeks through willpower. But eventually, when life gets hard and willpower runs low, you skip the gym because your goal was to go to the gym, not to be a person who exercises. And the moment the goal feels too effortful, you abandon it. But if instead you adopt the identity of someone who is athletic, someone who values physical health, someone who moves their body regularly, then going to the gym is not an effortful goal. It is an expression of who you are. When you are tired, you still go because athletes go when they are tired. The behavior flows naturally from the identity. The same principle applies to English thinking. If your goal is to speak better English, you will practice when it is convenient and skip when it is not. But if your identity is that of a fluent English thinker, someone who lives in English, someone for whom English is a genuine part of who they are, then thinking in English is not an effortful goal. It is an expression of your identity. So I want to invite you to try on that identity right now, the identity of someone who thinks in English, not someone who is trying to think in English, someone who does. Feel how that identity sits. Let yourself inhabit it. When you wake up tomorrow morning and do your 5-minute situational simulation, you are not a language learner doing an exercise. You are a fluent English thinker starting your day. When you do your inner voice training during your morning routine, you are not forcing yourself to think in English. You are being yourself in one of your languages. When you have a real English conversation, you are not performing. You are communicating as a person who communicates in English. This shift from goal to identity might sound like a small semantic difference, but psychologically, it is enormous. And linguistically, it changes everything, because the day you genuinely start to feel like an English thinker, not someone trying to become one, but someone who is one, is the day your English starts to feel effortless, not perfect, not without gaps, but genuinely natural, genuinely yours. And on that day is not reserved for some distant future version of you. It is something you can choose today. The identity comes before the fluency, not after it. You adopt the identity, you act from that identity, and the fluency follows. Part 10. Your commitment. What happens now? We have covered a lot of ground in this masterclass. Let me bring it together into something you can actually act on starting today. When we started by understanding the translation trap, why your brain defaults to native language thinking, and why that default is the root cause of fluency problems. We went inside the fluent speaker's brain and understood the three core processes of fluency: automaticity, chunking, and prediction. We built a complete six-method brain training system: concept first thinking, inner voice training, chunk absorption, situational simulation, emotional association building, and output without safety nets. We created a daily schedule that integrates all six methods in a realistic, sustainable way. We explored the psychology of brain training, including how to manage fear, self-consciousness, perfectionism, and identity resistance. We went deep into advanced techniques, including dream journaling, accent absorption, conceptual mapping, and immersion bubbles. We identified the six real-world indicators of progress that tell you your brain is genuinely being retrained. And we recognized the five common mistakes that block English thinking and learned how to avoid them. And we ended with the most important concept of all: the identity of a fluent English thinker and the power of inhabiting that identity before the fluency fully arrives. Now here is your assignment, not homework, not a suggestion, an assignment, because this masterclass is only valuable if you act on it. Today, within the next 3 hours, do three things. First, I'd set up your daily schedule in your calendar. Block the time for each brain training method. Make it real. Make it a commitment, not something you will try to do. Something you will do. Second, start your first conceptual map. Take a piece of paper right now and write the word emotions in the center. Branch out with every emotion you commonly experience. For each emotion, write the English words and phrases that express it. Spend 15 minutes on this map, and this is your first real act as an English thinker, not an English studier. Third, do 5 minutes of inner voice training tonight. Before you go to bed, lie in the dark and think through your day in English, not a translation of how you would describe it in your native language. Think directly in English. What happened today? What did you feel? What do you need to do tomorrow? 5 minutes, just 5 minutes, to prove to yourself that it is possible, that you can do it, and that your brain is capable of English thinking right now, tonight. These three small actions today will launch you into the 6-month journey of brain retraining. And 6 months from now, if you have been consistent, if you have shown up every day, if you have pushed through the discomfort and the awkwardness and the moments of frustration, you will be a fundamentally different English speaker, not better at English as a subject, better at English as a way of thinking, as a way of being, and as a part of who you are. The brain is extraordinary. It rewires itself continuously throughout your life. It can build new pathways at any age. It can learn new languages, new ways of thinking, new ways of communicating. You are not too old. You have not missed your chance. Every day you practice, your brain is literally changing. New connections are forming. Old patterns are weakening. The English thinker you want to become is being built, neuron by neuron, connection by connection, every time you show up and do the work. This is Masterclass 2. The work continues in Masterclass 3, where we are going to take everything you have built in your brain and apply it specifically to the most challenging real-world English communication situations, presentations, debates, emotional conversations, professional negotiations, and spontaneous social interaction. The internal architecture you have built in this masterclass will power all of that external performance. Until then, keep thinking, keep training, keep showing up. In English, see you in Masterclass 3. Bonus section, Language and Identity, the deeper philosophy of becoming bilingual. I promised you a masterclass, and a masterclass means going all the way. So before we truly close, I want to take you somewhere deeper, somewhere beyond methods and schedules and neural pathways. I want to talk about what it actually means to be a person who thinks in two languages. And because understanding this deeper dimension will give you something that no method can give you on its own. Genuine motivation that never runs dry, even on the hardest days. There is a philosopher and linguist named Wilhelm von Humboldt who wrote in the 19th century that each language is not merely a tool for communication, but a unique vision of the world. He meant that when you speak a different language, you are not just translating your existing worldview into new words, and you are accessing a different worldview entirely, a different way of carving up reality, a different set of assumptions about what is important, what is worth naming, what relationships between things matter. English, for example, is deeply oriented around agency and individual action. In English, things happen because someone does them. The subject acts, the object receives the action. That this grammatical structure reflects something deeper about the Anglo-American cultural orientation toward individual responsibility, individual achievement, and individual causation. When you think in English, you are subtly adopting this orientation. You start to see events in terms of who caused them, who is responsible, who acted. Your native language probably has its own orientation. It might be more relationship oriented, more community oriented, or more oriented around states of being than actions, more oriented around natural forces than individual agency. When you shift between languages in your mind, you are actually shifting between different ways of perceiving and organizing your experience of reality. And this is not a loss. This is an extraordinary gain. You gain the ability to see situations from multiple cultural and perceptual frameworks simultaneously. Our researchers who study bilingual cognition have found that bilingual individuals consistently show greater cognitive flexibility than monolingual individuals. They are better at switching between tasks. They are better at considering multiple perspectives simultaneously. They are better at filtering out irrelevant information and focusing on what matters. They tend to show higher levels of executive function, the suite of cognitive abilities that allows you to plan, organize, it regulate your behavior and adapt to new situations. Part of this advantage comes from the constant mental exercise of managing two language systems. Every time you switch from one language to another, or even every time you choose not to use your native language when it is available, you are exercising your cognitive control systems. It is like a mental workout that happens every time you navigate two languages, and like all workouts, it produces greater strength over time. But the deeper advantage goes beyond cognitive performance. It goes to wisdom. When you have intimate access to two languages, you have intimate access to two ways of being human. You have the capacity for empathy that comes not just from imagining another person's perspective, but from actually inhabiting the linguistic world that shaped their perspective. This is a form of understanding that monolingual people simply cannot access in the same way. And think about what it means to deeply understand an English expression like the elephant in the room. This phrase does not translate neatly into most other languages. It refers to a very specific cultural behavior, the social agreement to not talk about something that everyone knows is a problem. When you internalize this expression, you are not just learning a phrase, you are absorbing a piece of Anglo American cultural psychology, and you are developing the capacity to see and name a social dynamic that your native language may not have a term for. And with naming comes awareness. With awareness comes wisdom. Every language has its own universe of such expressions, each one encoding a piece of cultural wisdom, a refined observation about human experience, a particular way of noticing what life is made of. As you absorb English thinking at depth, you're absorbing all of this. You're expanding the vocabulary of your soul, and not just the vocabulary of your communication. I share this with you not to make the task feel larger or more philosophical than it needs to be in your daily practice. I share it to remind you that what you are doing is beautiful. You are not just learning to communicate in a second language. You are becoming a richer, more expansive, more capable human being. You are earning the ability to move between worlds, to see from multiple angles, or to connect with people across cultural distances that most people never bridge in their entire lives. That is worth every moment of the discomfort. That is worth every frustrating conversation where the words did not come. That is worth every morning alarm you set for your English training session. You are not just learning English, you are expanding what it means to be you. La bonus section. What science says about adult language learning. Debunking the myths. There are some deeply held myths about adult language learning that hold people back before they even start. These myths are not just wrong, they are harmful because they convince people that fluency is not achievable for them personally. And I want to spend some time dismantling these myths with actual science so that you can approach your English thinking training with full confidence that what you are trying to do is not just possible, but natural. Myth 1. Adults cannot learn languages the way children do, so adult fluency is impossible. This is probably the most widespread and most damaging myth in all of language learning, and it is based on a real phenomenon, the critical period hypothesis, that has been wildly misunderstood and overgeneralized. The critical period hypothesis, and originally proposed by neurologist Wilder Penfield and later popularized by linguist Eric Lenneberg, suggests that there is a window during childhood, roughly from birth to puberty, during which language acquisition happens most easily and results in native-like proficiency. During this period, the brain is extraordinarily plastic. It reshapes itself easily in response to linguistic input. After puberty, this extraordinary plasticity reduces. But here is what the myth gets wrong. A reduced plasticity does not mean no plasticity. The adult brain is still highly plastic. It still changes in response to experience, still forms new neural pathways, still can acquire new languages to high levels of proficiency. What changes is the ease and the timeline, not the ultimate potential. Adult learners take longer to reach high proficiency, and they typically retain some foreign accent. But many adult learners do reach genuine fluency, but including the ability to think in their target language. Hundreds of studies have documented this. What adults have that children do not have is actually a significant advantage in many respects. Adults have developed metacognitive ability, the ability to think about their own thinking and learning. They can apply deliberate learning strategies. They can identify their own gaps and target them. They understand grammar concepts that children absorb unconsciously. And they have vast world knowledge that helps them understand new language in context. And critically, they have strong motivation, the kind of purposeful, self-determined motivation that children rarely have because they are not choosing to learn their native language. Research by Benny Lewis, Krashen, Dernier, and many others in the field of second language acquisition consistently shows that motivated adult learners with access to good methods and sufficient input can achieve remarkably high levels of proficiency in a second language. The ceiling is much higher than the myth suggests. Myth 2. You need to start young to ever sound natural. This myth is also based on the real phenomenon that most adult second language speakers retain some accent. But accents are not the same as lack of fluency. And millions of people speak a language fluently with an accent. Accent refers to pronunciation patterns. Fluency refers to the ability to communicate effectively, naturally, and without translation. These are separate dimensions. Furthermore, many adult learners have reduced their accent dramatically through deliberate accent training of the kind I described in the advanced techniques section. And the accent absorption method works because the brain does retain significant plasticity in phonological processing, even in adulthood. It is harder than it is for children, but it is achievable with consistent, targeted practice over time. And here is something important. For most real-world communication purposes, a foreign accent is not a barrier. It is simply a characteristic. Most native English speakers in today's globalized world regularly communicate with non-native speakers and are thoroughly accustomed to a wide range of accents. What matters is clarity, vocabulary, grammar, and naturalness of expression. Accent is the least important of these. Myth 3. Grammar study is the foundation of language learning. This is a myth perpetuated by the way languages have been taught in schools for centuries, and it is one of the main reasons so many people spend years studying English and still cannot speak it fluently. Grammar study is not useless, but it is not the foundation of language acquisition. It is a supplement. The actual foundation of language acquisition is comprehensible input, meaningful, contextualized exposure to language that you can mostly understand. Stephen Krashen's input hypothesis, which has been supported by decades of subsequent research, and argues that language is acquired, meaning deeply internalized and available for automatic use, primarily through massive exposure to meaningful input. Grammar rules are acquired unconsciously from this input, not consciously from explicit study. Think about how many grammar rules you know in your native language. Almost none. You never studied them. And yet, you follow them perfectly. You never make a subject-verb agreement error in your native language, even though you could not explain the rule if asked. That is because you acquired the rule through input, not through explicit study. The same process is available in English, but it requires input. Massive, meaningful, emotionally engaging input. Myth 4. Fluency requires perfection. We touched on this when we talked about perfectionism as a psychological obstacle. but it deserves its own treatment here because it is so deeply ingrained in how people think about language. Fluency is defined in linguistics as the ability to produce language smoothly, continuously, and with appropriate speed, without excessive pausing, hesitation, or self-correction. Notice what is not in that definition: perfection, freedom from errors, textbook correct grammar. These are not part of fluency. They are part of formal academic correctness, which is a completely different standard. Native speakers of any language make grammatical errors regularly, and they use colloquial forms that violate formal grammar rules. They use incomplete sentences. They use made-up words. They use expressions that technically make no logical sense. English is full of expressions that are logically absurd. It is raining cats and dogs. I could care less. A blessing in disguise, break a leg. And yet these are perfectly natural, perfectly fluent English. Fluency is about naturalness and effectiveness, not about perfection. When you liberate yourself from the myth of perfection, you free up enormous cognitive resources. Resources that were previously being used to monitor and correct every utterance can now be devoted to communication. And paradoxically, when you stop monitoring for errors, your error rate actually drops because your brain is operating more naturally and efficiently. Myth 5. You need to live in an English-speaking country to become fluent. And this myth was perhaps partially true in the pre-internet era, but today it is simply false. The internet has given every English learner in the world access to unlimited, authentic English content: films, podcasts, YouTube channels, audiobooks, articles, social media, online communities, language exchange platforms, video calls with native speakers from anywhere in the world. The key ingredient is not physical location. It is immersive exposure and genuine interaction. And both of these are available to anyone with an internet connection, regardless of where in the world they live. The learner in Karachi, who spends 3 hours a day in deep engagement with authentic English content and regularly practices speaking with native speakers through online platforms, has more effective exposure than someone who lives in London but spends most of their time in a non-English speaking community. What matters is not the country you live in, but what matters is the choices you make about how you spend your time and what you do with your attention. If you structure your daily life to maximize your exposure to and engagement with English using the methods in this masterclass, you can build genuine fluency anywhere in the world. Bonus section: your first 30 days, a detailed launch plan. You have the system, you have the science, you have the psychology. Now let me give you a detailed and day-by-day guide to your first 30 days of brain training, because the first 30 days are the most critical. They are when you build the habit, establish the routine, and experience the first early results that prove to you that this works. The first 30 days are when most people either commit to the practice or give up. And I want to make sure you commit. In the first 7 days, your only goal is establishing the habit. You are not trying to feel fluent yet, and you are not trying to achieve anything dramatic. You are simply getting the daily schedule into your life and making it automatic. Focus on 3 things only. Do your 5-minute morning situational simulation every day without exception. Do 15 minutes of concept first thinking during your morning routine every day without exception. And write for 10 minutes about something in your day in English every evening without exception. That is it for week 1. Just those 3 things. I am keeping it to 30 minutes per day in week 1 intentionally because the goal is to build a sustainable habit. If you try to do everything at once in week 1, you will burn out in week 3. Start small. Build the foundation. During the second 7 days, add the chunk absorption practice. Find your first piece of authentic English content. Go through the deep processing steps with your first 5 chunks. Do this every day in addition to your week 1 practices. Your daily practice time is now approximately 50 minutes. In week 2, you will start to feel the awkwardness of the practice becoming slightly more comfortable. The inner voice training will feel a little less forced. The concept first thinking will have a few more spontaneous moments. You will notice small improvements. Celebrate these. They are real. During the third 7 days, add the inner voice reflection and planning practices. Just spend 10 minutes before bed thinking through your day in English. Spend 5 minutes in the morning planning your day in English. And add your first shadowing with intention session. 20 minutes of shadowing a piece of authentic audio content. Your daily practice time is now approximately 80 minutes. This is also the week to do your first real output without safety nets experience. Find one low-stakes English interaction opportunity. Comment in English on an online video. And send a message in English on a language exchange app. Have a 5-minute video call with a language partner. Whatever is most accessible and comfortable for you. But do it this week. Do not wait. During the 4th and final week of your first month, add the emotional association building through conceptual mapping. Create your first 3 conceptual maps: emotions, relationships, and work. Spend 20 minutes on each map. Add them to your daily review practice. Spend 5 minutes each day looking over your maps and adding new phrases. Also, in week 4, do your first full immersion bubble. Choose one Saturday morning and make it a 2-hour English-only bubble. Everything in English for 2 hours. No native language at all. This will be challenging and possibly uncomfortable. That discomfort is the training. By the end of your first 30 days, you will have established a complete daily practice routine, absorbed approximately 150 English chunks through deep processing, created your first conceptual maps in 3 major life areas, had at least 3 real English output experiences, and done your first immersion bubble. This is a genuine, substantial foundation. You will be able to feel the difference. You will also have a 30-day journal of your progress indicators. Look back over it. How many moments of spontaneous English thought did you have? How many times did you experience comprehension without translation? How has the quality of your inner English voice changed from day 1 to day 30? These are real, measurable, personal indicators of real neural change. They belong to you. They are proof of what you have built. Go into month 2 with the same discipline and the same self-compassion. There will be days in month 2 where you feel like you have regressed, and where the English thinking feels harder than it did at the end of month 1. This is normal. Language learning and brain training are not linear processes. There are plateaus and regressions built into the biology of learning. When they come, do not interpret them as failure. Interpret them as consolidation. Your brain is reorganizing, integrating, strengthening its internal structures. The apparent regression is often followed by a leap forward. Keep showing up. Keep doing the work. Keep choosing English and watch what happens. This masterclass has given you everything you need: the understanding, the methods, the schedule, the psychology, the science, the identity, and the launch plan. Everything else is up to you. And I believe you have exactly what it takes. You would not be here investing this time in yourself and your English if you did not. That investment is already proof of your commitment. Now go train your brain in English, starting today. Bonus section: the science of spaced repetition and how to use it for English thinking. No masterclass on brain training would be complete without a thorough discussion of spaced repetition, because this is one of the most scientifically validated and most practically powerful tools available for any form of long-term memory development. And when applied specifically to English thinking training, it produces results that no other method can match for pure efficiency. And spaced repetition is based on the forgetting curve, a concept first identified by German psychologist Hermann Ebbinghaus in the 1880s through his rigorous self-experimentation on memory. Ebbinghaus found that after learning something new, the memory of that thing decays in a predictable pattern. Without any review, you forget roughly half of what you learned within an hour. By the next day, you have forgotten about 70%. By the end of the week, you have retained perhaps 20 to 30%. By the end of the month, the retention rate drops even further. But here is the crucial discovery. Each time you review something just before you forget it, at the point where the memory is fading but has not yet disappeared, you reset the forgetting curve at a higher baseline. The memory comes back stronger than before, and it takes longer to fade the next time. Review it again at the right interval, and the memory comes back even stronger. And over time, with the right review schedule, something that once had to be studied repeatedly becomes permanently encoded in long-term memory. This is not just an interesting theory. It is a practical tool for English chunk retention that is vastly more efficient than the common approach of reviewing flashcards at random or rereading the same material repeatedly. Spaced repetition gives you maximum retention with minimum review time. Our research suggests that spaced repetition is approximately 50% more efficient than massed practice for long-term retention, meaning you remember the same amount with half as much study time, or you remember twice as much with the same study time. How do you apply spaced repetition to English thinking training specifically? Start with the chunks you are absorbing through the deep processing method. When you process a new chunk on day 1, review it briefly on day 2, and then review it again on day 4, then on day 8, then on day 16, then on day 32. This doubling interval pattern is a simplified version of the optimal spaced repetition schedule. You do not need to use a sophisticated app or complex system for this. A simple notebook works beautifully. Date your entries when you first process a chunk, then mark the dates for each subsequent review. When a review date comes up, spend 30 seconds with the chunk. Say it aloud. Use it in a sentence about your current life. Visualize using it. That is enough. The review does not need to be long. It just needs to happen at the right time. There are also excellent digital spaced repetition tools like Anki that can automate the scheduling for you. The advantage of a digital tool is that it tracks your performance on each review and adjusts the interval accordingly. If you remember a chunk easily, the next interval gets longer. If you struggle with it, the next interval gets shorter. This adaptive scheduling optimizes your review time even further. But regardless of whether you use paper or digital tools, the key is consistency with the review schedule. The magic of spaced repetition only works if you actually do the reviews at the scheduled intervals. Skipping reviews means the memories decay past the point of efficient retrieval, and you have to relearn rather than simply strengthen. So treat your spaced repetition reviews as sacred. A 5 minutes of scheduled reviews protects hours of initial learning. Beyond individual chunks, you can apply the spaced repetition principle to your conceptual maps as well. Review each map on a spaced schedule. When you review a map, you are not just reading what is already there. You are trying to recall the phrases and expressions first without looking, and then checking your recall against the map. That the active recall attempt, the effort to retrieve the information before seeing it, is what strengthens the memory most powerfully. Passive rereading is much weaker for memory than active recall. This active recall principle is one of the most important discoveries in cognitive science of the past century. The testing effect, as researchers call it, shows that trying to retrieve information strengthens memory far more than re-exposure to the same information. When you test yourself, when you close your notes and try to remember, your brain works harder to retrieve the information, and that harder work creates stronger encoding. The difficulty of recall is not a sign that you have not learned. It is the mechanism of learning. Apply active recall to your English thinking practice in a concrete way. Each evening, before you look at any notes or review materials, spend 3 minutes trying to recall from memory the chunks you learned today. Do not worry if you cannot remember all of them. The attempt to remember is doing the neural work, even when the retrieval fails. Then check your notes. The chunks you forgot will now be re-encoded more strongly because of the failed retrieval attempt followed by correct exposure. Bonus section: the role of music in English brain training. Music is one of the most powerful and most underutilized tools in language acquisition, and I would be remiss not to give it its own dedicated treatment in this masterclass. The relationship between music and language in the brain is deep, ancient, and practically useful for anyone learning to think in English. Music and language share extensive neural architecture in the human brain. The same areas that process the rhythm, melody, and timing of music also process the prosody of language, the rhythm, pitch, and timing of speech. And this overlap means that musical training and musical experience directly enhance the neural resources available for language processing. People with musical training consistently outperform non-musicians on tests of phonological awareness, verbal memory, and speech perception in noise, all of which are directly relevant to English fluency. But even without formal musical training, you can leverage music for English brain training in several specific ways. And the first and most obvious is English music, specifically music in genres where the lyrics are clearly audible and linguistically rich. Not all music is equally useful for this. Genres like folk, country, singer-songwriter, spoken word, hip-hop, and some pop are often very lyric-centered and linguistically clear. Genres where the vocals are heavily processed, distorted, or subordinate to the instrumentation are less useful for language learning. Listen to English music with full lyrical attention, not as background. Sit with the song, read the lyrics while you listen, and pay attention to the language. What phrases does the songwriter use? What images do they create? What emotions do they express? And how do they express them in English? Then listen again without the lyrics, trying to recall and understand what you heard. Then music is powerful for language learning for three reasons that align directly with what we have discussed in this masterclass. First, music triggers emotional responses, and emotional engagement deepens memory encoding. When a song moves you, the language of that song is encoded with emotional weight. Second, music creates repetition naturally. You listen to the same song dozens of times without it feeling like study, and repetition is what builds automaticity. Third, music is chunked language, where lyrics are made of memorable phrases that stick in your mind exactly the way language chunks need to stick. The rhythm and melody of a song make its language uniquely memorable. Many fluent English speakers who learned as adults credit specific English songs as sources of their most natural sounding phrases, because when a phrase is embedded in a melody you love, it goes into your memory at a depth that no vocabulary list can reach. And when you later use that phrase in conversation, like it comes out with the natural rhythm and stress it had in the song, which makes it sound remarkably authentic. Beyond listening to music, consider the role of rhythm in English speech more broadly. English is a stress-timed language, which means it has a strong rhythmic pattern where stressed syllables occur at roughly regular intervals and unstressed syllables are compressed to fit between them. This is fundamentally different from syllable-timed languages like French, Spanish, Italian, and many others, where every syllable gets roughly equal time. This rhythmic difference is one of the deepest reasons why speakers of syllable-timed languages struggle with English listening. They are expecting each syllable to get its full time, but English compresses unstressed syllables dramatically. The word probably in fast natural speech sounds almost like probably. The phrase, I am going to goes to I'm gonna, or even I'm na. The phrase, do you want to goes to do you wanna? And if your brain is not attuned to this compression, you miss enormous amounts of natural spoken English, even when you know every word involved. Training yourself to hear and produce the stress-timed rhythm of English is therefore not just about sounding natural. It is about comprehending natural speech. And music, with its clear rhythmic structures, is one of the best ways to internalize this rhythmic pattern. When you sing along with English music, really sing along, or not just mouth the words, you are training your speech production system in the rhythmic patterns of natural English. You are getting the timing into your body, into your muscle memory, in a way that purely verbal practice cannot achieve. So add music to your daily English immersion, deliberately, with attention, not as background noise, but as an active learning tool. Choose artists whose language you love, dig into their lyrics, sing along, and let the rhythm of their English become the rhythm of your English. Final words, the long game, and why it is worth playing. We are truly at the end now, and I want to leave you with something that stays with you long after this masterclass is finished. Something about the long game of language and what it means to play it with full commitment. Becoming someone who thinks in English is not a short-term project. It is a long-term transformation. And long-term transformations require a particular quality that short-term goals do not. They require faith. The faith to keep doing the work when the results are not yet visible, when progress feels slow, when doubt creeps in and whispers that maybe this is not working, Maybe you are not capable. Maybe some people just cannot do this. That whisper is lying. That whisper is the sound of your old neural patterns defending their territory. And that whisper is the sound of the translation habit resisting replacement. That whisper is not truth. It is resistance. And resistance, in the context of training and growth, means you are doing exactly the right thing. Every meaningful transformation in human life goes through a period of invisible progress. The seed underground, the muscle fiber being rebuilt after the workout, the neural pathway being strengthened through repeated activation. All of these processes happen below the surface, invisibly, without any external sign that they are occurring. And then, one day, sometimes suddenly, sometimes gradually, the evidence appears. The plant breaks through the soil. The athlete performs at a level they could not before. The English thinker catches themselves having an entire conversation without once reaching for their native language. That day will come for you. I cannot tell you exactly when. It depends on how much time you invest, how consistently you practice, and how deeply you engage with each method. But it will come. Because the brain is a machine built for learning. It has been learning since the moment you were born. It will not stop now just because you are asking it to learn something new. It will do what it has always done. It will find a way. Your job is to give it the input, the practice, and the time it needs. Your job is to show up every day, even when it is inconvenient. And your job is to choose English thinking over the comfort of your native language again and again until choosing English becomes effortless. Your job is to trust the process even when you cannot see the progress. And one more thing, enjoy it. Not just the destination, but the journey. Because this journey is one of the most extraordinary things a human being can do. You are reshaping your own mind. You are building new worlds inside your head. But you are learning to move between cultures and perspectives and ways of being with the fluidity that most people never experience. That is not a burden. That is a privilege. It is one of the most deeply human things you can do. Language is how we reach each other across the distance of our separate inner lives. Every new language you learn is a new way of reaching, a new bridge, a new connection to the vast, rich, endlessly surprising community of human beings on this planet. And English connects you to hundreds of millions of people. It opens literature, film, science, philosophy, humor, music, conversation, friendship, and understanding that would otherwise be behind a wall. You are taking down that wall, one thought at a time, one chunk at a time, one brave, real conversation at a time. That is what this masterclass has been about. Not grammar, not vocabulary, not test scores. The actual lived experience of thinking, feeling, and being in English, and the experience of having a whole new inner life available to you in a language that felt foreign and now, gradually, beautifully, inevitably, starts to feel like home. Keep going. You are already further than you think, and wherever you are going in English, it is worth getting there. This is Masterclass 2. The journey continues. See you in Masterclass 3.